Welcome to Performance Car Lounge, where each week we speak with enthusiasts selling their beloved performance cars. This week we speak with the seller of a BMW 2002 Alpina Tribute. The subject of today's podcast started life as a barn find and over the course of COVID was transformed into the iconic Marlboro liveried tribute to a BMW 2002 Alpina. And today we have joining us is the owner of the car, Dean. Welcome to the podcast, Dean.
Thanks very much. Happy to be here.
This car started as a barn find. Can you tell us about how you came across this car?
Sure. Well, naturally enough, I found it advertised for sale, but the buyer was not really into BMWs or European stuff. He was more a Mopar sort of guy, and he'd had the car for a few years, but it had been sitting in the back of a BMW workshop for a quarter of a century before he got his hands on it. So, it was certainly a car that hasn't had a lot of driving. And I immediately saw what it was, which was a completely rust-free 2002, which is probably the rarest car on the planet. Most of them out there are about probably 60, 70% real metal. The rest is all, being welded in and replacement panels. So very rare to get a completely dry, rust-free BMW 2002, particularly of that vintage. So it was a tremendous sort of opportunity to find that car.
Yeah, okay. And have you always been interested in BMWs and in restoring cars yourself?
In restoring cars, yes. Been doing that since I was 14. It was the only way I could get a car. I started out with a piece of crap, and then I laboriously worked on it and turned it into a slightly driving piece of crap. And from there on, have been building cars ever since. So I've obviously been able to improve my methodology and produce something a little bit of quality.
And
what I started at as a kid.
What was the piece of crap that you started out with?
It was an old, I think it was a 64 minivan. And I remember, breaking down all the time. It was just that kind of car.
So your background isn't actually in mechanics yourself. You were self-taught, is that right?
Pretty much. It was desperation. We were poor. I didn't have any money. No one was going to buy me a car. So that's why I had to go out and build something. And I probably did that for the first 3 or 4 cars and found I was quite proficient at building them and working on them. My second car was when I swapped that for a Mark II Jag. Mum was chuffed when I brought that home. And, I learned a lot more about bodywork because those things rust.
I bet it kept your hands full mechanically as well. Those old Jags aren't known for their reliability.
It was actually quite reliable. It was just the rust that wasn't reliable.
Oh, okay. So probably cured you of wanting to ever restore a car that had rust again. So you were lucky to find a 2002 that was rust-free. So that probably was a big relief.
Well, certainly, yes. I've restored quite a number of cars, and generally the cars I've sort of got into have been one of kinds. So, I don't see the point, and I'm not a purist of any sense. I certainly appreciate cars, but I didn't see the point in having an HK Holden or, an XA Falcon. I thought I wanted something that nobody else has, and that's why all the cars I've built generally have been fairly unique.
Yeah, I think you've definitely achieved it with this car. So you found the car and you bought it. And was the plan always to turn it into the Alpina version of the car?
No, fortunately, before it was put under a tarp and stored at the back of this workshop, it had actually been painted its original colour, which is Verona red, which is quite a beautiful colour and very rare too. And the interior had been retrimmed. The motor had been ported. There'd been quite a bit of work done to that as a complete rebuild as well. So there were things that were, for me, like heavy lifting, pretty much covered. But there was still a lot of work to do. There were a lot of missing parts. The car was incomplete. The car needed really a good freshen up, as well as also a new approach in terms of what it was and what it could be. So to that end, I started with good bones, I think.
Have you been a fan of Alpina's work in particular? It's an interesting company.
As I said, or as you mentioned before, I did do this as my COVID project. So it kept me in the garage most of the time and certainly away from anybody else because nobody wants to be around me when I'm building a car. And, I was able to produce a really beautiful little red 2002, but that's all it was. It was just a red 2002. and it just didn't sort of pop to me. It didn't say this car stands out. It looked great, and it does look great, but it had all the hallmarks to be something more special. And I hadn't been a great fan of Alpina. I've certainly appreciated them, like I have with my Lawrence and Mercedes and other vehicles that I've sort of gone into that have been very unique. But with the Alpina, they tended not to make road cars. When they, in that era, had the 2002s, they took them out on the track, they bent them like a banana, and then they'd part them out after each race. So generally, finding an ex-racing Alpina, which is what they were racing cars, is extremely rare. So they were not a vehicle that you can just go out and find like that. There are variants, and most are tributes, as mine is, very close to them. But again, it's a tribute.
And you're spot on. Like the Alpinas of today aren't race cars, and they're actually, the Alpina brand itself is known as a manufacturer unto itself, distinct from BMW. And that was only from 1983. But back in the day, Alpina was started out as a typewriter manufacturer, I believe. And they went bust when he went to move into textiles or something like that. And the company was started by a fellow by the name of Burkhard Bovensiepen. And he eventually... Yeah, I always like to include a bit of a nugget of information for the listeners that they can reproduce at a dinner party and bore the socks off everybody. But yeah, he ended up making some money on the share market and then converted the typewriter factory into a tuning house. And I guess Alpina really specialized in the Weber dual carburetors, in tuning those and producing some pretty spicy camshafts. And that's reflected in their emblem and their logo today still. But they were, like you say, they were really tuners and they made race cars back then. And yeah, I love the concept of taking, because the 2002 was really based on the BMW 1600, wasn't it? And they then took that engine out and a big engine was put in effectively. So big engine, small light car always makes for a lot of fun.
And the 2002 has been an iconic car for many reasons. It was pretty much the heritage car for BMW. It's turned their business around. I mean, it was the birth of the 3 Series. That's where it came from. So, it's a very important vehicle. And, certainly you'd have seen that when you did your research. For BMW, it's probably the most important car to them. It made the brand that it is today. I mean, there were beautiful cars they produced like the E9, but the 2002 was certainly the most formative and certainly gave them the right direction to where they become the successful car manufacturer they are today.
And your example certainly is a beautiful example of that beautiful car. If anybody's listening to the podcast version of this, you can see all the photos of the car on the Performance Car Lounge website, which is performancecarlounge.com.au. So well worth heading over and checking out the photos, because especially with the livery, it really is quite striking. What inspired that livery? Did you design it yourself, or was it inspired by a race car?
There's a couple of inspirations there. One, I had a red car and I wanted to make it pop. And I looked at different racing liveries, and the closest thing would have been more towards being a burnt orange type of car, promoting, some booze. That really didn't sort of pop to me, because there's really only one racing livery that is the most iconic, and that is Marlboro. And I have seen examples of BMW 2002s in that livery, as well as other 2002s right through from the 870s through the 80s, I think even right up to the 90s through the 5 Series. And some of the, I think the M1 was possibly raced that way too. So it is a racing livery associated with those motor cars. So it made sense to propagate it with this example of an Alpina Tribute. So, and as you say, it looks right, and it really does. I mean, I've had people say to me, what's better than an M3? Well, they point at my car, and I have to agree, it does. It's a car that you don't have to drive fast on the roads, because you already look like you're going to go fast. So, when somebody pulls up in their Porsche or M3 or the C63, I probably go off the line a bit slower because I really have nothing to prove. It's all there. And that's one of the beautiful parts of having a car like that. Not only does it, really attract attention and positive attention, but it's a really fun daily driver and very economical too. It's a lot cheaper to run than everyone else trying to drag me off.
It's good to hear that the livery was inspired by racing and not that you're just a cigarette enthusiast. And we should mention there, I think you have done the responsible thing by including on the livery the quit line number on the rear panel of the car. I got a little chuckle out of that when I saw that.
Sort of equalised a bit of negative press that's likely to come with it, if any. But most people appreciate that Marlboro's an iconic racing livery, not only through America and Europe, but also here in Australia. I mean, let's look to Holden.
Yeah, Peter Brock used to have the Marlboro Commodore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it a wrap? It's not painted, is it? Is it
No,
a wrap?
it is a wrap. When I built that car, I built it to be able to bring back to complete the original car. So the car can be brought back to its original condition and type very easily without a lot of changes necessary. But I wanted the vehicle to be able to retain its character and originality, but at the same time also be able to jump out of its skin and pop as a very authentic Alpina Tribute.
And who did the wrap for you?
DW wraps. So if you see on the side, there is his logo as well. So he did a great job for me, and I'm really happy with the result. It's been on there probably about 2 years now, and it's as solid as the day it went on.
You mentioned before how economical the car is. I guess that's largely down to the fact that it's super light. Do you know how much it weighs?
I really don't know. It doesn't seem to weigh a lot. I've had a lot heavier cars than this. So it's a good lightweight little car, but it's a 2-litre. So clearly I can drive it like I stole it, and I'm not going to get the best gas mileage. But it is a car that loves to be driven, and loves to be driven to the nth. And fortunately, I can say it drives and sounds exactly how it looks.
There's just something about carburetors under wide open throttle that just sound amazing, especially when you compare them to today's cars, with their computer controlled crackle tunes. The authenticity of a carbureted car at wide open throttle is just stirs the heart, I think.
Well, this is actually a TII Tribute, so that means it's fuel injected. So it's a non-carbureted car. It actually has the Kugelfischer mechanical injection.
Right.
So it's the rated and more reliable and more effective Kugelfischer mechanical fuel injection.
So I think the carbureted cars put out about 165 horsepower. So your car probably puts out a little bit more than that.
I don't recall the exact figures, but when I had it properly tuned and dyno tuned to absolutely get it humming, I don't remember the power output, to be honest. I can't give you that. No. I really wasn't that interested in it. It's not a track car. This is not a race car. It is a daily driver. It is a car you put in your collection and everyone's just going to go and want to look at it. I just find you take that car anywhere and there's a crowd around, and there's a big differential between owning a car like this, Porsche or a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. People appreciate you. You've brought something to them they've never seen before. You brought something back to life. They realise that it's not a new car. I've had kids have trouble getting into the car. They don't know how to press a button on the door handle. Standing out there going, well, how do I get in? I'm going, you press the button and pull, right? So it's certainly old school in that sense, but everything inside and driving it, it's just like driving a modern car, and it performs and drives and feels like one. It's a very easy car to live with and very, enjoyable car to drive and own. And that's part of the reason it's a bit of a struggle for me to let it go, because, I've probably not enjoyed a car as much as I have with this one. But my circumstances are that I can't be dropping gearboxes on my chest anymore. I'm getting too old for that. So I'm going to have to find myself a new hobby.
I've seen some examples of 2002s with sort of a race car inspired interior, but the interior of your car looks obviously quite comfortable, which would suit a daily driver. Is that the interior that came with the car when you bought it? And did you have to restore it?
No, the original interior, which was probably restoration in the late 80s, early 90s. It was done in velour, and it was really toasty. If you can imagine being in the back of a workshop in Queensland, with our summers, it was pretty much all toast. So I totally ripped out the interior and replaced it entirely. So the dashboard, which is perfect, obviously didn't go anywhere, but everything else was completely refreshed. The door cards, door trims, I did that with the red piping. I didn't want to make it loud. I wanted it to feel like it was factory. So when you get in the car, it feels like factory. It's comfortable like a new car.
It looks like a very nice place to be, honestly, the inside of that car, and it does look quite new. Is it running the original spec sound system, or was there even a sound system in that car, like a tape deck or something like that?
A radio. I think it was a radio back then.
Radio, yeah.
It was pretty flash if you had a radio. No, I've got something in there that's certainly not original, but it's got Bluetooth and can take telephone calls on it and hands-free. So I did that from a pure convenience point of view. But yeah, certainly a retro sound system wouldn't be a problem, and something more to the era perhaps. There are many kinds of retro sort of sound units you can get that look like old school, but perform like more modern types of sound systems.
The deck that you've got in there, for I guess that's the term we'd use, actually seems to suit the interior of the car quite well. It doesn't stand out as being not really period correct or anything like that. So it sounds like you've got the best of both worlds there. You've got the modern conveniences and it blends into the car quite nicely.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be ostentatious. At the end of the day, those sort of vehicles were very conservative in terms of how they were appointed, and I wanted to sort of maintain that in the flavour of the vehicle, because it is a tribute, so it needs to sort of match the era as close as it can, but also it's got to be a realistic daily driver. It's got to be something you can live with, something you can take your partner or your kids out for a bit of a burn and feel comfortable and safe at the same time.
And I believe the car's done approximately 77,000 kilometres. Is that accurate, or like
most cars of that era are an unknown quantity?
Yes.
So I think that's a number that I could find that's currently on the odometer. So I wouldn't stand on any odometer number from a vehicle from early 80s under. They only ever went to 5 digits.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And most of them didn't survive that long to 5 digits because, there'd be failure, or they weren't driven like new cars are. New cars, you can get much greater mileage than you can older cars. And it's not just the quality, it's the fact that they're engineered to last. And providing you service a modern vehicle, it'll last you, 500,000 to more in terms of kilometres.
You mentioned before that, a C63 or a Porsche might drag you off at the lights. But this car isn't about that.
A Corolla will drag me off the lights. Old cars aren't fast.
I imagine, though, that this would be a bit of a momentum car to drive, being light. Like, once you get it going, is it a lot of fun to have, like, on a twisty mountain road, if you can keep the momentum up?
Oh, absolutely. It drives beautifully. It handles perfectly. It took me a while to tune the suspension. I wanted to get just the right height because I've got 15-inch wheels. Normally they came out with 13s. So, it's got much larger wheels and wider tyres than it would normally run for that type of vehicle, but it fits with the style of the vehicle. And, having the short shifter with the drag 5-speed, it's a really enjoyable car to drive around. And yeah, modern cars, they're a lot quicker. They're a lot more agile in some ways, but they just you don't get the same feel. You're more divorced from the road with a more modern vehicle. With something like this, you really feel like you're connected.
Oh, you're basically wearing that little car, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of fun to drive, and it brings a smile to your dial.
I'm sure it does. Who do you get to insure a car like this?
Shannon's.
Everybody says that. So we've got a very unique car here that's obviously been a labour of love for you. You've obviously enjoyed building it and driving it, and you say you're selling it because it's probably a bit much for you to work on now. How much are you asking for the car?
Well, I've put it on car sales at 145. It's an iconic car. It's the only one of a kind in Australia. And, there's tire kickers out there, but I know there's also somebody that's serious. The sort of person that's going to buy this car is just somebody who wants a car that's going to make their collection pop, something that nobody else is going to have, and something they can just hop in it and just drive anywhere. I mean, the number plate's 777 AO5, and I went with 777 because it's a God number, and it's probably the most iconic number you're going to have at any casino, bar 777. So that's the main reason I chose that. Plus, it was also an iconic racing car number in Australia. So I tried to connect a few things with that 777 numbering. I tried to make the livery relevant. I didn't want it to just be, some sort of fantasy. I wanted it to actually have some distinction and meaning because, the car does. And when you build something like that, as I have, and you put several years into building the thing, which I've done, you want it to be credible. You want it to really be what it shows itself to be. And you want to be able to open the bonnet and go, wow, that looks freaking awesome. I can see I've got a racing car here. And that's a big part of why the valve cover is an Alpina valve cover. It helps to promote that fact. It is a warm motor. It's not a blueprint race motor. However, for a daily driver, it's ideal for what it is mechanically and in performance-wise. But certainly in terms of the interior, how that's laid out, the gauging, the advertising on the vehicle, those sort of things, yeah, all fairly relative to the vehicle. And I didn't want to over-badge it either. That's why I've kept BMW and Alpina, because they were never a complete or just an Alpina car. They were a homogenization of BMW and Alpina. So when you see the BMW or the Alpinas that are being sold in the showrooms today, they're still a BMW, but they're being marketed fully as an Alpina.
And what's next for you? After you sell this car, what will you move on to next?
I don't know. Who knows? Somebody might offer me a nice E-Type that I can start playing with, or an E9 or a little Porsche 911 or something like that, and I may consider that sort of thing too. But I tend to move on when I do things, and I've sort of come to this point where my son's not around for me to share the car with, and that was really where I was building the car to in my previous vehicles. So if you don't have someone to share them with, you don't have as much joy from them. And I guess I might revisit that again in the future, but for now, I'd rather focus on other things. And as I'm getting older, that's probably more important to me now than ever before.
I agree 100%. And sharing the passion is basically all of the enjoyment. And that's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah, totally. Life's short. Don't worry about money. You just be passionate about what you do and it'll follow you. And it's the same with your joy. You just do what brings you joy and it'll follow you too.
And looking on car sales, like you said, there's nothing else to compare it with. It's the only one on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if anybody's interested in finding out more about this car and getting in contact with Dean, head to the Performance Car Lounge website. We'll have all the photos of the car, all the details of the car on the website, and a link through to Dean's ad. And you can reach out to Dean and find out more from there. Dean, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the podcast. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
You're welcome, Stuart. Great talking to you too.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us at Performance Car Lounge. If you have a performance car with an interesting story that you are selling, contact us at performancecarlounge.com.au.